there's a whole, just a lot of things going on with this this trial right now. It came to a close this week, right?
No, it just started today.
It just started today. I see. I see.
Just started today. So, I talked a little bit about this in my earlier meeting this morning, but this is absolutely one of those topics that we need to do our Paul Revere Act on and make sure all agents are aware of this and some of the potential consequences. We'll give it 5 minutes. I know William's here to record.
Yeah.
If not a lot of people jump in based on the hour, we'll still kind of conduct some of this information, and I'll try and do some Q&A as well. But yeah, this is a hot button topic, and there's a lot that affects us as an industry that's centered around all of this.
And I think just having William record too as well, we can distribute this recording too, just so that it can be something that...
We should have William record my Monday 9 a.m. the industry news. That should be recorded as well.
Okay. We'll add that to the list for sure.
Perfecto. Let me send out a real quick blast to invite listeners.
Awesome.
Did I miss you last week for dinner? I didn't make dinner last week.
No, so I wasn't able to make it as well either. I was in Reno for the week, and so I wasn't able to attend, which was super unfortunate because I really wanted to see everybody. But
Did you say hello to my son while you're in Reno? My son lives in Reno.
Oh no, I didn't. Oh, I forgot that your son lived in Reno.
Yeah, no. He went to NAR and he loves Reno. So
absolutely, I remember talking to you about that.
Yeah.
I actually had to go to the NAR campus to run an errand, and it was beautiful. The leaves were just starting to turn for fall.
Gotta love it.
It's a beautiful campus, and so
it is a beautiful campus. Yes, it is. I will. I'll be there probably in the next couple of weeks. I'm gonna go see him and his crew.
Oh, that's exciting! You're gonna love it.
Yeah.
It's still, the weather is still warm enough. It's not overly cold yet, and so that's
always really nice. I'm just inviting people. The other option is I can always reschedule this because I'd rather have live participants, but we'll give it another 5 minutes or so. Kathy, can you hang for the whole hour if necessary?
What was that question, Dee?
I said, can you hang for the whole hour if necessary?
If necessary, yeah. I have a feeling, though, we might not have too many people because we had a big discussion on this morning.
Yeah. Well, this morning was kind of unplanned. Actually, this morning, all I had intended to talk about was the buyer broker, and buyer agency. But, you know me, I get carried away when it's the topic I'm passionate about. So I couldn't help myself.
Yeah.
No, we love it.
Yep.
Let's see. Hi, Donna. Donna, did you have any questions from this morning?
No, not really.
Pretty straightforward.
I'm concerned. Jason doesn't think there's much to be concerned about. So we're starting to take a proactive step in making sure that we're getting a buyer broker agreement signed. We're behind everybody up here, so it's going to be delayed before we have to do anything.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing is, since I've been in real estate, I've seen two pretty significant shifts. One, which was buyer agency is not even that old. So buyer agency, as we know it, is roughly, I'm going to say 20 years old, depending on the market in which you practiced. Back in the day, MLSs used to be broker-controlled entities. And so the buyer broker was just the whole reason why we're having this discussion around this is essentially it was just if you brought somebody to the table, I agree to pay you. But it essentially was the listing agent, was the agent. And then subsequently, there was a sub-agency that existed, which was, what we know as a buyer-broker agreement. In either case, both worked for the seller, which is the justification as to why the seller was responsible for the entire commission, so to speak. And then with the rise of that, like, for instance, there were states. Colorado is a good example. Colorado is a state to where everybody in Colorado is a broker, which helped to mitigate two things. One, which was real estate almost went away in Colorado as we know it, because you had the attorneys in Colorado that all got together and said, hey, look, you guys are practicing law without a license, and we fundamentally disagree with that. And particularly when it came to what was then known as salespersons. So, just to put some history to it, I'm sure all of you guys know already, but I'll put a little bit of context to it, which is a real estate agent is just somebody through a jurisdictional reference is allowed to practice in the industry of real estate. They are not realtors. Realtors is a name that belongs, or a trademark that belongs to a trade organization called the National Association of Realtors. So not every person who practices real estate is a realtor. There are a couple of different trade organizations. As a matter of fact, this morning I mentioned that in the United States, the National Association of Realtors didn't even recognize a Black real estate agent or a person of color until 1960. So prior to that, then you had another trade organizations which functionally served a different community that was called realtists. So you have realtors and you have realtists. Both still exist today. Obviously the National Association of Realtors being the largest trade organization. I mentioned this morning that the National Association of Realtors holds a lot of power. Some people say that essentially they own Congress. There's a lot of power in the National Association of Realtors. People don't realize. As a matter of fact, it's one of the largest. So the National Association of Realtors boasts almost 1.6 million agents across the United States. And then Canada also has a division of it as well, with similar numbers and a similar way of practice and such. So it's very powerful, particularly in North America. And some of the things that are happening, and I'll just kind of jump right into it, is where we're under attack. And this is not new, by the way. I mentioned this morning. This has actually been something that's been ongoing for decades. So, I mentioned to Donna and Kathy this morning, there may be some redundancy in what we covered this morning, but because real estate, or the way real estate has been practiced, has been a relatively proprietary industry for 100 years, there was a lot of control and a lot of things that weren't revealed to the public by the nature and relationship that the National Association of Realtors had with its members. And so when the internet came to light and everybody was like, hey, what's this cool new toy? How do I get to be a part of it? How do I stake my claim and, put my name on this thing? The National Association of Realtors and all of its sub-organizations said, hey, let's not make this a proprietary industry as it once has been. That wasn't the original intent, by the way, but they said, well, how do we utilize this thing called the World Wide Web? How do we actually function in this as well? And so, the end result was all of this information that had once been proprietary is no longer proprietary. That's kind of what happened. And so just as you look at the nature of these multiple lawsuits, it's not just one lawsuit, it's multiple lawsuits. But as you look at the nature of these lawsuits, it all stems from the fact of now this information that had been, quote, kind of hidden from public eyes was now readily available, and people had the opportunity to scrutinize, including the feds, the federal government. And so the federal government has been trying to build a case against the National Association of Realtors for decades. Well, they've seized their opportunity, in addition to the fact of there are several well-funded private citizens who are involved in these other lawsuits, the biggest one being Burnett and Stitzer and Morale. Those are the ones that are happening right now. That's the one that's happening right now. The big daddy of them all, or the big kahuna, is that one. That trial actually kicked off today. So let me give you a little brief history in terms of antitrust and what that is. So in the late 1800s, there was what was his name? I believe his name was John Sherman, who was a senator who had talked about these big companies, right? You had robber barons and things like that, and I won't give you a big history lesson, but you had these big companies as America was just kind of getting its legs under it, that was really kind of monopolizing and controlling pricing and how business was conducted, and they were creating these kind of anti-competitive practices to where they owned everything. I mean, you look at, these companies back in the day that bought smaller companies, or they could afford to compete on a level that they couldn't, thereby getting the larger share of the business. Well, John Sherman, who was the senator, said, "Hey, no, that's unfair. You're creating an anti-competitive environment. You're doing these things called price fixing." And guys, keep in mind, this was 140 years ago. 140 plus years ago. So it was happening then. So, there was legislation that passed, which was about, not doing those things and not creating a monopoly to where you controlled all the interest. You were the only player in the town and everybody had to buy from you. That was kind of the crux of the antitrust language, or the antitrust Sherman Antitrust Act. I'm sorry, my brain froze for a second. Okay, now fast forward to today, and fast forward into a business like real estate. Keeping in mind, real estate as we know it was started essentially in the early 1900s, right? A bit more than a century ago. And at first it was wildly unregulated, right? It was, real estate agents at that time were everywhere. They were ubiquitous with everything. You talk about an all-in-one service. They were your barber. They were your insurance person. They were your psychologist in a way. They were everything. Much like it is now, but more formalized then. And then real estate started saying, well, hey, how can we all be more uniform? John Smith over there in that county is doing these things, and I'm doing these things over here in this county. And, folks are starting to notice. And so, essentially you had an organization that fundamentally colluded to say, well, okay, if we want this thing to be this thing and we've got all the power, we need to make sure we maintain the power. And how do we do that? Let's all agree that we're going to charge no less than this, and that this list of services is what we provide, and anything else may be more. And so they basically created a set of rules which exist to this very day in some respects. And that's what real estate agents that practice as realtors are governed by, is this set of rules, this set of very rigid laws that has been a fundamental framework for who we are and how we practice forever. Definitely for as long as I've been in real estate, and longer than that. And so where are we today? Essentially, we're at this core today to where we're being challenged on these laws. Consumers have looked at it, and again, what this lawsuit is about, this lawsuit today, and there's another one that'll be coming up in April, but the lawsuit that started today on April 16th, which is the Stitzer-Burnett Commission. And essentially, it's a trial that is taking place in Missouri court. It's against several of the larger real estate brands, which is why you've seen some real estate brands start to settle or make settlements, and they're starting to make some corrective action, is because the weight behind this does not look favorable to the industry. Now, that's not to say we'll lose as a whole, but many of the components of it don't look favorable as an entity, as an industry. If you think about it, those of us who practice, there's a common language that exists among all of us, right? Which is, well, we normally charge X percent. Usually that number is 6% or 5%. I'm willing to do these things if you do this thing, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer and Mr. and Mrs. Seller. But, we all function from that same language that we were all taught the day we got our license and hung it with a broker or became brokers ourselves. We all use a similar language. So kind of by default, the way in which we practice and the way in which we communicate with each other and then subsequently communicate that same information with customers is by definition, a monopoly or, an anti-competitive kind of a process. I can remember back in the day where, these 1% brokerages were basically being ostracized because they were screwing up the mix. And how dare you come in and undercut our value and, create a price that's more favorable to a consumer? How dare you denigrate what our industry is? And so, this has been an ongoing process for a long time. I mentioned this morning, the National Association of Realtors has been compared to something akin to a cartel, and so in this lawsuit, essentially the plaintiffs, which are out of Missouri, have basically said, hey, look, these realtors have all colluded to force us as sellers to not only pay the person that we hired, who is known as the listing agent, but also forced us into servitude to the buyer's agent as well, and responsible for the payment to that buyer, to that buyer's agent. So, they're responsible for the whole shebang in terms of payment. And again, remember how I mentioned that buyer's agency isn't that old. It's really not an old thing. It's not an old system by the history of the National Association of Realtors. So in that lawsuit, they're basically saying, look, we don't feel like we should be responsible to pay for the buy side. How's that our responsibility? Why am I mandated? Why is it mandatory for me to pay this thing? And conversely, on the buy side, buyers have never had any control of, how they compensate the person who they hire, which is now known as a buyer's agent. So based on these things, that's kind of been the basis of the lawsuit. Sellers have been forced into paying a fixed amount that is recognized by the industry, and they're forced by default to pay the competing side's salary as well. So basically, the lawsuit is essentially folks don't agree with that. It's clearly price fixing and fits in that antitrust bucket. So this Stitzer-Burnett lawsuit is really the core of it. And again, these lawsuits have been piling up, since 2014, 2015, but these more recent ones came about in 2019, with Morale being the biggest one. But so what have we started to see, and what kind of proactive events have started to happen? Well, the National Association of Realtors is under fire for many different things. Again, when you have a trade organization like the National Association of Realtors, which is an extremely powerful entity all by itself, extremely strong governmental presence, it's hard to take down something like that has been around forever. It's hard to take something like that down. But because of its very nature and how the leadership has functioned over time, NAR is actually being beat up over a number of different things. It's embroiled in the midst of sexual impropriety allegation against its former president, who had to step down in August as a result of all of these allegations. They're saying it's been bad leadership from the top down for quite some time. And they're looking at the function and the form of the leaders of the National Association of Realtors. So all these things come into play all at the same time. And we've got this kind of weird perfect storm going on. We have this collapsed inventory. We have these rising interest rates, which had to happen. You've got these commission lawsuits, which are piling up. You've got folks who are separating themselves from all the turmoil around this. You may have all been aware there have been some large companies that have recently seceded from the National Association of Realtors, which is Redfin was the first one, followed by Anywhere, which is a conglomerate that houses Coldwell Banker, Better Homes and Gardens, Sotheby's, Corcoran, many other companies all under that same umbrella or fold. And then, of course, Remax. And those are really hard, large organizations that will have an impact. And we're still trying to understand what that actually means or what that will actually do to the industry, which is fairly significant. That's why I still draw a bead on some things will change dramatically and some things may not change at all. But certainly the way that we interact with consumers will forever be changed. And there's no if, ands, and buts, no other way around it. That will absolutely be a thing. That will absolutely be a thing. So because these companies have decided to kind of pull out, want to distance themselves from all the noise and all the confusion with the National Association of Realtors, it leaves us in a very precarious spot, at least at the moment, in the way we practice. One thing that we, as an organization, have been talking about with you as agents, boots on the ground people, is the best way to prepare is to be over prepared. Start to make corrective action now, just as some of our company counterparts have done. And what does that mean for you as an agent? Because NAR has also just recently stated it's no longer going to enforce its cooperation rule. In other words, that the commission is the sole responsibility of the seller and is going to allow a listing agent to offer a zero cooperation or a zero commission listing, which means that if you're representing a buyer, the only way you're going to be compensated or be able to be compensated is through your buyer. Now, again, some people look at this as, oh my God, how's that going to work? How are we going to be able to do that? How's that going to happen? It's not new. It's not new at all. It's actually happened in other parts of real estate for forever. I know in the commercial sector, happens every single day. My first commercial deal, I didn't understand that, and my buyer was the one who said, hey, so how am I going to pay you? And I said, blindly, because I was new to commercial at that time, I was like, no, don't worry about it. The seller's going to pay it. He goes, they are? Since when? And then I had to be quickly schooled of, no, I said the wrong thing. Sorry, my mistake, right? But that's happened in commercial forever. The state of Washington has been very proactive. Again, these lawsuits are not new. They've been around for a while. As a matter of fact, the one today was one that was in appeal. So that appeals process is usually a 4 or 5 year kind of a thing. Well, it reset, and this is kind of what we're dealing with is the appeals process in terms of this lawsuit. So all of those things are being reheard and retried and all that good stuff. But the state of Washington saw this coming. They had been looking at this and the language that's associated with all of this and, what are next best steps and all that good stuff. So the state of Washington, more than a year ago, said to all of its practitioners there, hey, you don't have to be a part of the National Association of Realtors. You don't even have to be a part of the State Association of Realtors or any local board. And guess what? You can still have access to the multiple listing service. All of those things happen. And so Washington has been functioning with the removal or the adjustment of language that would enjoin the seller to be responsible for paying the commission. To the commission will be the responsibility, of each party, meaning the seller is going to pay theirs and the buyer is going to pay theirs. So they've adjusted their language, quite some time ago. but as you know, we've been in a relatively frozen real estate market for housing market for a few months now, and companies that are similar to ours, and this speaks to the strength of a company like Radius, while other prop tech companies are failing or withdrawing. Radius or Agent Desk continues to grow. Our investors have tremendous faith in where we're going and still support us, which is how we were able to successfully secure a round B. But other prop tech companies are failing, and so you look at all these things that are happening. Again, that supply, that supply and demand market, which we are so governed by, has changed quite a bit. There's lots of demand, still no supply. So because of that, you're now starting to see some of that supply come back online, which is somewhat anomalous right now, only because we're moving into those traditional seasonality months. But even that being said, those seasonality months are kind of topsy-turvy. So we may see a softening of prices as new inventory comes on, still yet to be seen. But, again, this lawsuit is the driver. This legal challenge is the driver of so much. I mean, if you think about it, there have been other big industries that have gone through the same. They were so big that, we felt it was impossible for anything to change. I'm trying to think of other industry, alcohol, tobacco, those industries have been under fire. Tobacco more specifically, that was an industry that was always under fire. And it took lots of legislation over decades to make sweeping changes to what that looked like. That's why you don't see cigarette ads on television anymore, things like that. Movies or movie creators have started to put ratings on their movies that will also include, if there are depictions of someone smoking, because that's how harmful it's been deemed. The same is true in kind of real estate right now. Again, it's been a big player for so long, and all of these big companies that we're all familiar with, these big real estate companies, they were very incestuous with the National Association of Realtors. They were a hand-in-hand marriage, which is why you're starting to see some of these companies start to separate themselves from all the troubles that have been caused by this, extremely tumultuous marriage between us and the National Association of Realtors. So, that leaves the National Association of Realtors to kind of go into some of these lawsuits without their bed partners and, having to field what it is. So NAR is trying to make some fundamental adjustments. But again, what does that mean for us as an industry in the near term? As decisions start to roll out, and even any of these settlements that have been proposed still have to be agreed upon. So nothing's set in stone yet anyway. But, as these settlements start to take hold and people start to have a more fundamental understanding of what's actually happening, and realtors start to educate themselves, or real estate agents start to educate themselves, you're probably going to see a government is shift more government in the short term to really kind of outline how real estate is practiced, how it's bought and sold. Again, some of these things yet to be, but to shore up for this flood of whatever. We as individual practitioners need to be mindful of these things. We need to be aware that these things are coming down the pike and start to have these very real conversations with our customer base, more specifically our buyers. These are the things that are going to happen, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. I just wanted to educate you as to how and why. You're still going to get the same great service from me. It's still going to be, me delivering the same quality I always have. The only difference is you're going to be responsible for paying me directly. These kinds of things. So, without giving too much detail and giving as much detail as possible, these are kind of the things that we're faced with right now. And, this is not an opportunity for us to bury our head in the sand and kind of go, oh, these things will never happen. I'm not worried about it. They're not going to come down to me. I'm telling you right now, they're absolutely going to come down to you. Right now, we're already feeling the pinch. You just haven't fully recognized what that feeling is. We're already feeling it right now. But because we're so focused on boots on the ground, we have no idea what's going on back at headquarters or what's going on, at a higher view than us. So, again, the fact that these two mega companies, Anywhere and Remax, decided to settle, with the plaintiffs, and then make some changes around how the business is conducted, that's pretty significant stuff. That's if we were a battleship, that's the National Association of Realtors and its subsequent holdings taking water in, and sure, the damage can be mitigated. And like I said, real estate is not going away. And some of these are my own personal views and feelings. The real estate industry is not going away. It's always going to be a people-based, because it's a relationship-based business. It's never really been a sales business, even though people say it's a salesperson. There's a component of sales to it, but we develop relationships. That's what we do every single day. We meet people and develop relationships, and by that way, that relationship is going to benefit that person, because we're helping them to make a very informed life decision. That's basically what we do. By the judge allowing some of the folks to be able to withdraw, and then some of the plaintiffs may also withdraw as a result of these settlements. What is that actually going to mean? I'm not a lawyer. That's my disclaimer. But, from a jurisprudence standpoint, it looks ugly, and it looks like it's going to be a very aggressive battle is kind of how I see it. You're going to hear lots of speculatory language that happens everywhere. But, the reality is it's going to end up in the hands of, lawyers who do this best, and we are going to be the fallout. But for NAR to make substantial changes just days before the lawsuit started, which is today, that says a lot. It says a lot. They're trying to get ahead of it and mitigate any damage. And again, NAR being so powerful, it also has some of the world's best attorneys. So if you've got some of the world's best attorneys saying, you guys may want to make some adjustments so that we at least look like we're trying, right? That's, it tells you a lot. Any questions so far? Does anybody have anything they want to add, anything they want to comment to? I know I talked about this morning, but it's so critical that you guys are aware of what this all looks like and what this really means for you and your business model and for us as an industry, because it's a game changer. It literally is a game changer. Like I said, almost 30 years in this business for me. I've seen a few changes, but nothing this major or massive. And, if we're just always doing best practices, the impact is going to be relatively small, in my opinion, if we're always doing best practices. By the way, which is what we should be doing. We should always be doing best practices. There's never a cause or there's never a circumstance, in my opinion, to where best practices should be thrown out the window. But I know agents who breach best practices every single day just because the situation, in their opinion, may or may not warrant it. And that's kind of by very definition, that self-serving activity, which is what most of these lawsuits are about. We've been and businesses by design are self-serving. So I'm not criticizing. I'm a proud member. I've been a proud member of the National Association of Realtors my entire career. So yeah, it's been a self-serving. Has it been beneficial to me? Absolutely. I've made lots of money in this business and, had a great career. There's no complaints and, on my side of the fence at all. But, do I believe these changes are necessary? Absolutely. 100%. I believe these changes are necessary, as with any organization that has power. And again, the primary reason why the National Association of Realtors exists is to keep the integrity and the sanctity of the buyer, of the broker and the broker cooperation relationship intact. That's the core of this business model. That's literally what this trade organization promotes is, the viability of the broker and that relationship and the ability of monetary cooperation. That's kind of what's been promoted, and that's what we protect all the time. Is everybody familiar with procuring cause? Even some of the concepts around procuring cause, which is being able to prove that I was the one to facilitate this sale. In other words, I was the person who introduced this customer to this property in order to facilitate this sale. Even that concept has changed. Because consumers have access to the same data we have, which is they've got eyeballs on Zillow, they've got eyeballs on Redfin and other sites that produce this aggregate data that we share called our listing information. And so it makes it a bit more difficult right now to actually confirm that we are procuring cause. In other words, those persons who introduced this particular buyer to a property to facilitate the sale, because the buyers now can easily say, nope, I saw it on Zillow and I called D. Wilmore and I said, hey, I want to see this property at 1234 Main Street, which takes away the fact that I'm even the procuring cause, because the buyer found the property themselves and enlisted me as more of a professional key to open the door, and then a scribe to write the contract so that they could facilitate the sale. So being mindful of those things and how we're actually introduced to our customers and what they may or may not have seen. That's why I say, if you want to really continue to remain in this business and stand out, you have to create a concierge experience to where you're not making your customers work. So many of us make our customers work every day. Hey, here's a link, find the property, and when you do, let me know, we'll go look at it. In my opinion, that's not the best consumer experience I can imagine, which is why consumers are, in some respects, up in arms. They're like, hey, you make me do all the work and you get paid this big old fat salary, which is why there's been some fundamental changes or fundamental ways that we look at procuring cause. And these are things that affect us if we're, primarily buyer's agents, for sure. Because again, if the buyer can clearly say, no, saw it on Zillow, requested information, and then I hired an agent, you're not the procuring cause, which may mean you can't get paid. So these are things to think about. I mentioned that those companies, at least from a term perspective, settled for, $83 million for Anywhere and $55 million for Remax. But some of the other things I mentioned that they're also agreeing to settle for is, again, not allowing their agents to say that buyer services are free. That's been a general practice for companies forever. Hey, we're not charging you. We get paid by the seller. Our services to you are free, which is an artificial inducement of a buyer to as we solicit our services to that buyer. So that's one thing that you'll see go away. Another thing is, again, the participation in the MLS. So essentially, the buyer will have to, the listing agent will have to immediately disclose how the cooperating broker is to be compensated, including a zero commission compensation. If the listing broker is not, cooperating or paying any compensation, it has to be as soon as possible for any active listing. So that's going to be a material change in the listing service or in the listing agreement. If there's no compensation, it has to be stated up front. And combined with that, which is most listing services will allow an agent to aggregate or sort which listings or which property types that a buyer may be interested in, to purchase that allows the agent to sort by commission. So if that way the agent can show all the higher commissions first, followed by the lower commissions. That's going to go away. MLS's, at least what's being proposed, won't allow that technology to exist anymore. And as you know, and I'm sure some of you have done the same thing yourselves, which is agents tend to, or realtors, let's be specific, realtors tend to show properties based on what's going to be the biggest payout for me. This one's paying a 3, this one's paying a 3, this one's paying a 2.5, this one's paying a 2. As a matter of fact, that used to be a listing pitch. So many companies, and I've taught it myself, I've taught it to agents, Mr. Mrs. Seller, as you can see, and this would come up when there's a discussion around supporting why you should get a 6% commission, or these days 5% commission. It would say, Mr. Seller, and then you draw out a grid, and you'd say, we have to compensate a buyer's agent as well for bringing their buyer to this property. We would call it a marketing fee. I mean, we've used different names for it over time. And then we'd draw out this grid, and we'd say, if this house over here is paying 3.5% or 3%, and this house over here is paying 3%, and this house is paying 1%, and this house is paying 1%, which house do you think is going to be shown first? That used to be standard language. It was in a listing presentation. People would do that all the time. And that would convince the seller, okay, well, I guess we need to pay a full pop so that our house can get seen too. And again, part of the basis of this lawsuit, that's unfair practice. That's anti-competitive and price fixing. So, which is why you're starting to see these companies actually actively settle. I mean, some of this is common sense. When you look at it on its face, sure, we can make lots of argument. Yeah, well, it is kind of, but the reality is it absolutely is. You know what I mean? Again, like I said, we used to teach this stuff. This was very common practice. So, part of the settlement is that, because it's not only money, these companies are agreeing to fundamentally change how they practice real estate. So that technology is probably going to go away. And maybe it should, for sure, because it absolutely gave the seller a false sense of how they should be compensating not only the listing agent, but the buyer's agent as well. So we need to clearly disclose that commissions is 100% negotiable. And by the way, it's written on most contracts. So if you guys have taken the opportunity to study and know your contracts well, you'll know that, for residential real estate, commissions are not set by law. They are 100% negotiable. Agents just fail to communicate that language. And in the flurry of all the paperwork signing that happens when you're committing to purchasing a property, or an agent's engaging in, listing agreement or a sales contract, they kind of gloss over that language of, oh yeah, by the way, commissions are 100% negotiable. And for buyers, it's almost never been had, because again, their primary source of compensation on the buy side has been from the seller, from the sales side. So, by making some of these fundamental changes, most of these big companies believe that they're going to sidestep some of the scrutiny and some of the pain that's going to happen. Again, all of these things still need to be approved by an adjudicator, and they're relatively fresh. Like Anywhere settled or agreed to settle sometime in August, followed by Remax, which was sometime in September. And I suspect KW and a couple of other defendants will start to come online. I think some folks are kind of waiting to see some of the events that are going on in the lawsuit, or what may happen in court before they make decisions to kind of do that. But, some of it may be too late. And again, final court approval for some of these probably won't be until very middle of 2024. This stuff has to be deliberated and all kinds of stuff. So, again, just getting ahead of it. Like you look at a company like Anywhere. Again, Anywhere is a big real estate conglomerate. Anywhere has probably close to 200,000 realtors inside of its organization through various different companies. Now you've just seen, potentially 200,000 realtors leave a large trade organization like the National Association of Realtors. I know for sure some of those terms in their proposed settlement was that they're not going to require their company-owned brokerages to participate. As a matter of fact, they will prohibit their company-owned brokerages in participating in the trade organization known as the National Association of Realtors. And they're strongly suggesting that their franchise-owned shops, usually Corcoran or Better Homes and Gardens franchises, that they shouldn't either, but they'll leave it up to the individual business owner, even though it may be under the franchise umbrella of that. So that's huge. Same with RE/MAX. So potentially we may see anywhere between 400 and 700 real estate professionals across the United States secede from the National Association of Realtors. How does that impact us? Well, without a doubt, just based on the lawsuit alone, that lawsuit's got to be paid for somewhere, right? So our dues are probably going to go up. Broker owners like myself and like the company itself and other broker owners or independent brokers are probably going to see that cost somewhere. I mean, that lawsuit's going to have to be paid for by someone. And so, we're going to see increased cost in our dues, things like that. The services we have may change. The things that we get that we've always been comfortable with may change. So it's a pretty big impact from an industry standpoint. I'm going to go on an aside for a minute. I told you guys how I got into real estate, or most of you know, or at least some of you know, is, I worked in medicine before I got into real estate. And, I specialized in crisis intervention and critical incident debriefing. So I worked with police departments and emergency rooms, and I was literally that person who talked people off bridges, involved in more critical incidents than I care to mention in my career. Part of the reason why I had decided to sunset that career, even though I loved what I did, was the fact of talk about industry changes. Some of the work that I did, insurance companies started to say, well, maybe we're not going to pay for that particular service anymore, and we'll leave that under a general med physician, things like that. Anyway, long story short, I started recognizing the writing on the wall, which is this industry is changing significantly, which is going to impact how I make my money, right? Not huge changes, but changes enough to where I felt they were concerning. I'm not a particularly handy guy. I can hang a picture and screw up a tile floor like the next guy, but I'm not a laborer. My craft doesn't sit on that side of the fence. So I started looking at, what other white collar career could I get into that I feel I could be successful in that could afford me a lifestyle that I'm used to. Lo and behold, I got into real estate, and that was essentially my journey in. And I did the two practices for about 5 years, but eventually my part-time practice and my regular career, the money started to look the same, and it was a no-brainer. I was like, well, I won't renew my professional license in my primary career, and I'll just practice real estate. But where I'm going with this is, had I not made fundamental changes when I did, it would have impacted me greatly. It would have impacted my ability to earn. It would have shifted some of what my individual practice and my service model looked like. There would have been sweeping changes, but I was proactive, and I recognized early on these changes could impact me greatly, even if it's not in the immediate term, but in the long term. So I made that shift. I made that pivot, and I've never looked back. It's been a very fruitful career. So what I'm sharing with you guys right now is you're seeing these wide sweeping changes for companies to secede from the largest trade organization. That's huge, guys. That is It may seem like business as usual. That's a huge thing. That's ginormous. So, again, don't have a crystal ball. Can't really tell you what the overall impact is going to look like. But I would say it'll be significant enough to where, you'll have some people want to exit out of the business just as a whole for feeling of lack of support or lack of clarity as to what their next directional steps should look like. So I have rambled on enough. I know I've jumped around a bit, but I'm trying to cover significant points. I mentioned the fact of, that NAR's leadership is under attack. Its president had to resign. They're calling for a top-down overhaul of all of the leadership in the National Association of Realtors. So, it's got a lot going on. And, we're right in the middle of all that's going on. It's like mom and dad are fighting in the worst way and grandma's trying to get custody. You know what I mean? It's, I know that was a weird analogy, but I think you guys get the point on that. So anyway, thank you for letting me talk at you. I'm happy to answer any questions or field any other data that you guys want to share. Otherwise, I'll give you about 8 minutes back. And keep in mind, this will be an ongoing discussion. This is not our first, and it won't be our last, but you guys all need to be mindful of it. Hey, Liz.
Hey.
What's happening, girl?
I have a quick question. I don't know if you answered it earlier because I hopped on a little bit late. So brokerages like Redfin, where they said, we're getting rid of NAR. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think brokerages are going to be able to do that?
Well, 2 big brokerages just did that right behind Redfin, which is Anywhere and Remax. Remax and Anywhere. Anywhere is a conglomerate brand that has Sotheby's, Coldwell Banker, Cochrane, Better Homes and Gardens, a number of different under that umbrella. They have both seceded from NAR. So I see this as a domino effect. And you're going to have other companies. I mean, when people are in trouble, it's like, when you're hanging out with your best friend and your best friend's running around breaking windows, you stop hanging out with your best friend because you're not trying to go down with your best friend. That's kind of the effect that I see happening, that domino principle. I suspect in the next 30 to 45 days, we'll probably see another few companies decide, I'm out of here. That's why I said we're potentially seeing a loss of probably 400,000 to 700,000 realtors from secede from CAR, which will have a significant impact, without a doubt. Without a doubt. How could it not? You can't have a membership drop that large not affect the fundamental workings and operation of a trade organization that large. I lose you guys?
No, I'm here. I wanted to mention that so as far as Anywhere Brands and Remax, they're allowing their franchisees to determine their own policy.
I know, I said that.
Okay.
Yeah. The corporate-owned shops is a mandatory. The franchisees, they're strongly recommending that the franchisees follow suit, but they're allowing them to make the decision as independent business owners.
Yeah. Okay.
Hila? No.
Oh, no. I was just wanting to let you know that we could still hear you and that you didn't lose us.
Okay. Yeah, guys, this is an ongoing topic. I am tirelessly immersing myself in every bit of data I can, as I have for months, on this, because it is such a critical topic. It is so important to be aware. I mean, again, I know folks like Liz and Kathy and, Donna and Angela, you guys continue to immerse yourself in real estate. And that's absolutely what's necessary for you to stay whole and continue to run a successful practice. And being at the forefront and really understanding what these lawsuits are about and how they may impact how you function from day to day is critical to your success. So again, we'll probably be doing at least a session a week as new data comes in. I'll be putting out some additional information via written communication so that you guys have documents on how best to proceed as best practice. I want to leave you with, don't look at this as doom and gloom. Any big business over a long period of time makes fundamental changes or they die. You look at a company like Kodak. Some of you may not remember this statement, but everything used to be a Kodak moment. Anytime you're going to take a picture, hey, it's a Kodak moment, because Kodak owned the picture business. Everything was Kodak. Even if it wasn't Kodak, it was owned. Kodak failed to make changes. Bit of history, a bit of trivia. Kodak actually created the digital camera, but they didn't believe that there was any viable commercial use for this thing, and subsequently sold rights to Sony. And we all know the history from there, right? Everybody carries a digital camera, in their personal device. So Kodak, after 117 years, went away. It disappeared because it failed to make fundamental changes to how it saw the world. It felt it was too big for the world to leave it behind. And the world absolutely said, see ya. That's akin to NAR. NAR feels, or may feel, it's too big for any fundamental changes to exist, in which case we're seeing the writing on the walls. Consumers are absolutely battling back, and they're going, this is BS. How do you continue to make these rules and say it's in the best interest of the people that you're serving, which is the consumer? All right, Donna, were you going to add something?
No, not really. Not. I was just thinking about the same thing happened with Blockbuster and.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Blockbuster. Did you ever think we'd see the day where video stores would, all but not exist? And kind of thank God, I guess, on some level. But anyway, guys, change is inevitable. Shore up your businesses. Start to have those conversations with your buyers. Hey, I'm going to be charging you in the near term, or this is how I get compensated. I'm working on some scripting. I'll get with Kathy. We'll share a little bit more with you guys. Anyway, have a fantastic rest of your day, rest of your week. Feel free to reach out to me. Get on my calendar if you want to discuss things further individually. And I will talk to everybody soon. Thanks for participating, guys.
Thanks. You're the best. Have a good one, everyone.